Imagine not merely a ship, but a floating city that blocks out the horizon in the harbor of Alexandria. Before you stands the Tessaracan Terrace, a 400-foot, 40-banked giant, an ancient Titanic. Its sides tower above the waves like fortress walls, while its decks are adorned with hanging gardens and gilded halls. 4,000 rowers drive this colossus, a vessel designed to strike terror into the enemies of Egypt. Yet, beneath this external grandeur lies a fatal flaw whispered about in the port. This Leviathan is almost incapable of sailing the open sea. It is exorbitantly heavy, ruinously expensive, and utterly useless in combat. This engineering triumph is the perfect mirror of the soul of the man who created it. The ruler's name is Ptolemy IV Philopator. His era will become an exact reflection of his flagship, blinding luxury on the outside, concealing absolute internal rot and immobility. In our previous episode, Egypt stood frozen at the peak of its power. Ptolemy III, Euergetes, the last conqueror, had returned from his Babylonian campaign, elevating the empire to the zenith of its glory. The treasury overflowed with Persian gold, the borders seemed unshakable, and the fleet dominated the Mediterranean. The Great Father committed only one fatal mistake. He built an illusory cocoon of safety for his heir. Young Ptolemy IV grew up in bliss, never knowing the metallic scent of blood, the choking dust of campaigns, or the bitterness of failure. His memory held only the taste of sweet wine and the elegance of poetry. Today, what unfolds before you is not a chronicle of victories, but a chronicle of terrifying moral decay. You will see how a bored aesthete transforms into a monster. We will witness the first matricide in the history of the dynasty, when a son raises his hand against the great Berenice, the woman who gave him both life and his crown. The narrative will transport us to the epicenter of the Battle of Raphia. There, 130,000 warriors and hundreds of war elephants will clash in a slaughter where the outcome is decided not by military genius, but by blind chance. Finally, we will understand why a resounding victory can be more terrifying than a defeat, triggering the mechanism of a country's internal destruction. This is the story of how one weak personality, thirsting for pleasure, is capable of crushing an empire faster than any invading army. Let us begin. In the Alexandria of 221 BC, mourning for the great benefactor was instantly replaced by a stifling atmosphere of fear. Ptolemy IV ascended the throne, a young man of 23 whose hands were accustomed to papyrus scrolls and wine goblets, not the hilt of a sword. At court, they whispered, "The lion has died, long live the lamb." But in the shadow of this lamb lurked a man ready to turn the Golden Age into an era of terror: Sosibius. This figure often remains in the historical shadows of Cleopatra or Caesar, but it was this gray-haired bureaucrat who orchestrated the collapse of a great dynasty. He did not command armies, nor did he possess a claim to the throne. Before us stands a master of survival. Sosibius instantly deciphered the nature of the new king. Ptolemy IV craved pleasure, but was panic-stricken by responsibility. To control such a puppet, the puppeteer decided to clear the stage. Sosibius identified two threats capable of tearing power from his grasping fingers. One was Magas, the king's own brother, a charismatic warrior adored by the army. The other was Berenice II, the living goddess and the king's mother, who possessed a will of steel. As long as these two drew breath, Sosibius remained nothing but a servant. So he began to act in whispers. Instead of brute force, he deployed paranoia. In the cool of the palace chambers, to the sound of clinking wine cups, the minister methodically poured the poison of suspicion into the young king's ears. Your brother is gathering officers. Your mother is displeased with you. They see your weakness and hunger to take the throne. For a long time, Ptolemy wavered, torn between filial duty and the terror of betrayal. But weeks of skillful lies finally shattered his psyche, which was already undermined by alcohol. Fear for his own skin ultimately outweighed the call of blood. Ptolemy broke and gave the fatal signal, an order that forever divided the history of the Ptolemies into before and after. The reckoning did not take place in a public square, but in the silence of the royal baths. Magas was bathing when mercenaries burst into the chamber. The hot water was instantly dyed crimson. Next came the turn of Berenice. The woman who had once personally eliminated her mother's lover for the sake of the country's future was strangled by the command of her own son. The irony of fate reached its peak. She who had gifted the Ptolemies with Cyrene and greatness fell as the first victim of their degeneration. The psychology of this moment is merciless. By killing his mother and brother, Ptolemy IV did not simply eliminate competitors, he destroyed the ruler within himself. A classic deal with the devil took place. The young man surrendered his soul and the state to Sosibius in exchange for the right never to grow up. From that day on, the real levers of control passed to a clique of temporary favorites and the king's mistress, Agatha Clea. Ptolemy obtained what he desired: absolute freedom for orgies and the mysteries of Dionysus. But he failed to notice that he had locked himself in a cage, the keys to which were firmly settled in his minister's pocket. The dynasty which drew its strength from the sacred authority of the savior gods had stained itself with the filth of patricide. News of the bloodbath in Alexandria spread instantly, and while Ptolemy IV celebrated his imaginary liberation, in Syrian Antioch, these reports were being studied by another young king. His name was Antiochus III. The ruler of the Seleucids saw in these events not a tragedy, but an opportunity. He realized the Egyptian lion is not just sleeping, it is agonizing. The predator stepped out to hunt, resolving to reclaim everything his ancestors had once lost. While Alexandria drowned in wine and blood of relatives, a true predator awakened in the east. The young ruler of the Seleucids, Antiochus III, noticed not just a change of power, he sensed that Egypt had been decapitated. The revenge his dynasty had awaited for half a century was finally possible. It is the spring of 219 BC. Antiochus III, who would go down in history as the Great, crosses the borders of Ptolemaic possessions in Syria. The defensive line, meticulously built over decades by the ancestors of the current king, crumbles under his onslaught. Deprived of orders and pay, the garrisons throw down their weapons. However, the most painful blow is struck by their own. Theodotus, the governor of Syria, and the most talented commander the Ptolemies had, defects to the enemy. Behind this act lies not a thirst for profit, but pure contempt. Being a warrior to the marrow of his bones, Theodotus refuses to obey a monarch who has exchanged war councils for endless orgies. By handing Antiochus the keys to Syria and the fleet, he chooses a real leader over a pathetic parody. The path to the Nile Delta is now open. While the army disintegrates, the Alexandrian court continues to feast, ignoring the thunder of enemy boots at the threshold. In the moment when destruction seems inevitable, Sosibius plays his most brilliant and cynical card. The cunning dignitary realizes Antiochus cannot be held back by brute force, therefore lies must be deployed. Thus begins the Great Bluff. Sosibius sends out envoys. For months, the best rhetoricians of Egypt lull the vigilance of the Seleucid king. Diplomats flatter, promise territorial concessions, and assure him of their readiness to capitulate. Blinded by easy triumph, Antiochus commits a fatal error. Believing the enemy, he refuses an immediate dash to Memphis. Wishing to wait for winter so that the ripe fruit would fall into his hands of its own accord, the invader gifts Egypt a priceless resource: time. Meanwhile, under the cover of lying speeches in Antiochus's camp, Memphis becomes witness to events that change the face of Hellenism. Sosibius and Agathocles feverishly forge a new sword. They empty the treasury, buying up mercenaries all over the Mediterranean. But the ranks remain empty. Then Sosibius decides on a desperate step, trampling a centuries-old taboo of the Ptolemies. For the first time in 100 years, Greek officers come to Egyptian villages not for taxes, but for recruits. 20,000 indigenous inhabitants, whom the Macedonian elite had seen only as laborers for centuries, now grip sarissas in their hands. Yesterday's plowmen go through exhausting drills, transforming into a monolithic phalanx. This choice is a textbook deal with the devil. By arming the indigenous population, Sosibius saves the throne today, but dooms the dynasty to ruin in the future. By granting power to the oppressed majority, he strips the Greeks of their monopoly on power. But in the winter of 217, no one thinks of consequences. The camps thunder with noise. Egypt is creating a shield capable of withstanding the blow of Asia's best army. The era of negotiations has passed. Antiochus III realized the deception only with the arrival of spring. In a fury, he raises his phalanxes and rushes towards the borders of Egypt. Two colossal machines of war move towards each other. The point of their collision will become the zenith and simultaneously the sunset of the Hellenistic world. The meeting place is Raphia. June 22, 217 BCE. The southern border of Palestine, the outskirts of the city of Raphia. The air is thick with suffocating dust and the heavy, sweetish smell of manure. Two gigantic armies are arrayed against each other on a plain, sandwiched between the Mediterranean Sea and the endless sands of the desert. On one side, 70,000 warriors of Antiochus III, confident in their conqueror king. Opposite them, 75,000 soldiers of Ptolemy IV, many of whom are gripping a Macedonian sarissa for the very first time. But the main drama unfolds not among men. On this day, history conducts a unique experiment. War elephants stand frozen on the flanks. And this is not just a battle of animals, it is a collision of continents. On the right, with Antiochus, stand 100 powerful Indian behemoths, the true tanks of antiquity. On the left, with Ptolemy, are 73 African leviathans. However, forget the familiar giants of the savannah. Before us are the forest pachyderms from the Atlas Mountains, a now extinct subspecies. These beasts are inferior in strength, and as Ptolemy's mahouts discover with horror right in the heat of battle, they are panic-stricken by the roar of their Asian brethren. The battle begins with a catastrophe for Egypt. Antiochus's Indian giants crush their African kin like toys. Maddened by fear, the beasts turn around and trample their own cavalry into the sand. The left flank of the Egyptian army melts away in mere minutes. Antiochus III, seeing the enemy flee, thirsts for blood. Like a young Alexander, he rushes into the pursuit, dragging the Egyptian cavalry away from the battlefield. At this moment, the commander commits the classic error of his lineage, exactly repeating the failure of Demetrius Poliorcetes at Ipsus. Carried away by the chase, he effectively abandons the center of his army. The king believes in total victory, while his phalanx remains one-on-one with the main force of Egypt. And here, in clouds of dust, an event occurs that changes the fate of the dynasty. Ptolemy IV, the weak ruler and lover of poetry, finds himself cut off from his retinue. With no choice left, he rides to the very center of the formation. Casting off the mask of the Sybarite, he appears before the soldiers as a true pharaoh. His appearance acts like an electric shock. 20,000 indigenous Egyptians, the Machimoi, whom Greek officers despised and feared to arm, recognize him as their god-king. Yesterday's peasants, having passed through Sosibius's brutal drilling, do what no one expected of them. They do not run. The soldiers close ranks, lower their 6-meter spears, and with a roar, crash into the center of the Seleucid army. Antiochus's mercenaries, deprived of the support of their monarch and elephants, collide with a monolithic wall of fury. The elite silver shields phalanx of the Seleucids breaks. The pride of Asia crumbles under the blow of the despised Egyptians. When Antiochus III, heated from the chase, returns to the site of the battle, he is met by a ghastly silence. His army is no more. The field is strewn with thousands of corpses of his best warriors. He has lost. Egypt stood firm not thanks to the genius of a strategist, but thanks to the resilience of those whom the Ptolemies were accustomed to considering merely a labor force. Ptolemy IV has won the greatest victory of his reign. Antiochus flees, abandoning Coel Syria. The road to Antioch and Babylon is open. But in the victor's tent, while doctors bandage the wounded, something strange happens. Ptolemy IV does not give the order to advance. He looks at the map of the empire he could conquer with a single lunge, and he yawns. He is hot. He is bored. He wants to go home, to the cool of the Nile palaces and to his wine. A great chance to change the map of the world is about to be sacrificed to the laziness of one man. Instead of finishing off the wounded beast, Ptolemy IV commits the great refusal. Before him lay an open road to Antioch and Babylon. The Seleucid Empire, shattered at Raphia, could barely stand on its feet. While his generals demanded an offensive, the king merely glanced at the map, shook the dust from his boots, and ordered the return home. Ptolemy signs a peace treaty with Antiochus, contenting himself only with the retention of Coele-Syria. This decision is not political wisdom, but psychological capitulation. For him, victory is not a springboard to greatness, but a right to eternal rest purchased with blood. I have won, now leave me alone. This is the unspoken motto of the second half of his reign. For the sake of feasts and mistresses, he effortlessly throws away the chance to become a second Alexander. And this idleness will cost Egypt more than any military collapse. Upon returning to Alexandria, the monarch finally walls himself off from reality. The symbol of his new life becomes the Thalamagos, a gigantic floating palace on the Nile. This architectural madness was a 2-story villa on the water, adorned with gold, ivory, and cypress. Inside were grottos, luxurious halls, and bedrooms. Ptolemy glides across the water's surface, literally never touching his native earth. He hovers above Egypt behind a wall of gold and silk, ignoring the poverty and anger of his own people, who had just saved his throne. While the king drifts down the Nile, the reins of government are seized by the night rulers. His mistress Agathoclea, her brother Agathocles, and the old intriguers Sosibius turn the state into a personal feeding trough. While corruption swells to the scale of an epidemic, Ptolemy seeks himself in a new calling. Declaring himself the new Dionysus, he sets about bureaucratizing ecstasy. A surviving decree requires adherents of the cult to undergo mandatory registration in the capital and submit their sacred books for inspection. Just imagine the scale of the absurdity. A monarch who has abandoned the army and the economy is focused on creating a department of madness. He erects temples to Homer and composes tragedies that courtiers are obliged to praise under fear of disgrace. Raphia became not the beginning of a triumph, but the signal flare for a 10-year binge, in which the very foundation of the dynasty slowly rotted away. The victory at Raphia protected the dynasty from external threats, but simultaneously passed an internal death sentence upon it. 20,000 Egyptian machimoi, trained by Sosibius in the Macedonian formation, were returning home not merely as soldiers. These warriors brought with them dangerous knowledge. With their own eyes, they had seen the flight of Greek mercenaries and the panic of the invincible elephants. A truth, terrifying for the Ptolemies, had taken root in their minds. We are capable of defeating Greeks. National consciousness, which the Ptolemies had suppressed for a century, flared up like dry grass. While the monarch wasted the treasury on golden ships and the composition of plays, a genuine drama for his house was ripening in the temples of Upper Egypt. The Theban priests of Amun, guardians of ancient traditions, saw in the weakness of the central power a chance to return the country to the people. All that remained was to find a leader, and he was found. In 205 BC, at the sunset of Ptolemy IV's reign, an event unprecedented since the Persian yoke takes place. Upper Egypt secedes. This is not a spontaneous riot of the mob. This is a full-fledged coronation. A rebel named Hugronophor is proclaimed the new pharaoh. The prestige of the dynasty collapsed. In ancient Thebes, the ancestral gods and a local ruler reigned once more. The neighboring kingdom of Meroe openly supported the separatists with precious metals and weapons. The realm split in two. Alexandria lost control over the southern territories and, more critically, over the rich mines. Ptolemy IV Philopator, who took pride in his name, squandered the legacy his ancestors had gathered grain by grain. In this situation lies a cruel paradox. The decision to arm the indigenous population looked like a brilliant tactical move by Sosibius that saved the country from Antiochus. However, strategically, this step turned into suicide. The Ptolemies violated a fundamental rule of conquerors. Never put a sword in the hands of the oppressed if you do not plan to grant them rights. The king issued weapons, but did not offer freedom. And this blade, which protected the throne at Raphia, was now pressed against his own throat. For the next 20 years, Egypt would plummet into the abyss of civil war, draining resources faster than any royal feast. The Hellenistic world in the Nile Delta began to shrink like shagreen leather in a ring of enemies. A quiet death and a bloody sunrise. By 204 BC, the living god had turned into a wreck. At 35, Ptolemy IV looks like a deeply old man. Years of continuous orgies, alcohol marathons, and narcotic mysteries have burned out his body. The king no longer rules. He drifts in a fog of pleasure, while real power flows into the hands of the ball of snakes. At the center of this web lurks the unchanging trio, the eternal survivor Sosibius, the favorite Agathoclea, and her brother Agathocles. The shadow rulers control every breath of the king, every decree, and every coin. However, an obstacle stands in their path, the name of which is Arsinoe III, the wife and sister of the monarch, the very woman who inspired the phalanx at Raphia. The people idolize her, and the army sees in her the only worthy leader of the dynasty. The intriguers understand. The moment the king closes his eyes forever, Arsinoe will head the regency for the underage heir. In that instant, their heads will fly from their shoulders. Summer of 204 arrives. An unnatural silence descends upon the palace chambers. Ptolemy IV Philopator is dead. Chronicles are silent on whether his heart stopped from exhaustion or if the monarch was helped by those who feared sudden outbursts of royal anger. But subsequent events turn tragedy into farce. Sosibius and Agathocles are in no hurry to declare mourning. The conspirators lock the doors of the royal bedchamber, committing a crime against laws both divine and human. They decide on the unthinkable. They steal the death of the pharaoh. For several weeks, the palace participates in a surreal spectacle. The dead body rests in the cool of the bedroom, while officials dutifully bring documents to the deceased. Agathocles speaks before the people, broadcasting the will of the sovereign, and servants serve food and wine to a ghost. This monstrous mystification pursues a single goal: to buy time. The conspirators are preparing a murder that will make Alexandria shudder. While the city believes in the king's health, a mercenary named Philemon receives an order. The assassin infiltrates Arsinoe's chambers. The woman who survived the onslaught of elephants at Raphia proved powerless against a dagger in her own home. She is eliminated quietly, without witnesses. Only when both figures disappear from the board does Sosibius open the doors. The crowd seethes at the stadium of Alexandria. Heralds announce, "The great Philopator and Queen Arsinoe have departed to the gods." 2 urns containing ashes are brought out for display, but the people do not weep. A murmur runs through the rows. The citizens know everything. Rumors in the capital flow faster than water. Shouts about the queen's murder ring out from the crowd. Indignation grows into an angry roar, but at this moment, Agathocles leads a small boy onto the platform. Before them stands Ptolemy V Epiphanes. The 5-year-old child looks fearfully at the roaring crowd, clutching the hand of his mother's murderer. Sosibius crowns the boy's head with the diadem. The coup is complete. Power officially passes to those who turned the Golden Age into an era of terror. This scene reveals the true scale of the dynasty's fall. 100 years ago, Ptolemy I Soter committed a great theft. He stole the body of Alexander to build the legitimacy of the state upon his sacredness. A century later, his descendants hide the corpse of their own king, hoping to hold on to the throne. The circle has closed. The sacred bond between the pharaoh and the people, built by the first Ptolemies, is finally severed. An orphan child sits on the throne, while executioners tower behind his back. From this moment, Egypt ceases to be a subject of world politics, transforming into prey. In Rome, Macedonia, and Syria, the predators have already caught the scent of blood. The Egyptian lion is not simply weakened, it is in its death throes, and the vultures are already spreading their wings. Let us recall the image with which our story began. The giant ship Tessaracon Terrace, that floating palace, rotted away in the harbor of Alexandria, never having left the shore. Such a finale serves as the perfect epitaph for the reign of Ptolemy IV Philopator. From his father, Ptolemy III, he inherited the most powerful state in the Mediterranean, a gold ingot cast from victories and wisdom. But in just 17 years, he turned this treasure into dust. The triumphal victory at Raphia turned out to be the beginning of the end. By arming the Egyptians, the king did not grant them rights, provoking a rebellion that tormented the country for decades. The massacre of his mother and brother destroyed the sanctity of the dynasty. Ptolemy IV proved a terrible truth. To destroy an empire, one does not necessarily need to lose wars. It is enough to simply be burdened by the crown. He dreamed of art, mysticism, and love, but history does not forgive those who confuse the throne with a theatrical stage. The death of Philopator in 204 BC tore the last protective veils from Egypt. The secrets of the locked bedroom spilled out. The world learned that a 5-year-old child, Ptolemy V, sat on the throne of a great power, while murderers and embezzlers pulled the strings behind his back. For the neighboring predators, this served as a signal to attack. Philip V of Macedon and Antiochus III the Great conclude a secret pact of the kings. They conspire to carve up the possessions of the boy pharaoh, like the carcass of a slain beast. The era of Ptolemaic dominance has come to an end. Egypt has transformed from a player into prey. But who was this Antiochus, now threatening Alexandria? To understand the power coming from the east, we will have to rewind time. Let us leave the stifling palaces of the Nile and journey to the boundless steppes of Asia. In the next episode, we open a grandiose cycle, the Seleucids, from synthesis to fall. There awaits you the history of the dynasty that created the largest state of the Hellenistic world. If the Ptolemies began with the theft of Alexander's body, then the Seleucids arose thanks to love. We will see how the union of the Greek officer Seleucus and the Persian princess Apama spawned a unique civilization that fused West and East. This is a tale of how one woman's feeling builds empires, and the mistakes of descendants turn them to dust. Do not miss the beginning of a new saga. See you soon.